Johnny Carson interviewed over 22,000 guests, yet he kept a secret list of just 9 who truly captured his heart. Tonight, we're revealing who made the cut and the extraordinary moments that sealed their place in his affections. Jimmy Stewart, the man who touched Carson's heart. When Jimmy Stewart settled into that guest chair, viewers witnessed something extraordinary. Johnny Carson, television's unshakable master of ceremonies, transformed into an admiring fan before one of Hollywood's most genuine souls. Jimmy embodied everything America wanted to believe about itself, Carson once confided to a close friend. Decent, humble, real, the genuine article in a town full of pretenders. What audiences never knew was that Stewart's authenticity emerged from surviving unimaginable wartime trauma. The beloved actor had served as a B-24 bomber pilot during World War II, flying perilous missions over Germany, where his squadron suffered heartbreaking losses. During one horrific raid, Stewart watched 130 of his men, 10 complete crews, get blown from the sky. The experience left him with severe emotional wounds, causing him to lose so much weight he resembled a shadow of himself. When his parents saw him return from war, they were shocked by how much their son had aged, appearing 50 at just 37. Stewart channeled this raw anguish into his post-war performances, including It's a Wonderful Life, where his emotional breakdown scenes drew from very real pain. Stewart's appearances became yearly traditions, eagerly awaited by both audience and Carson alike. Unlike many aging stars who relied on well-worn stories, Stewart brought a natural, sometimes hesitant quality that Carson found refreshingly honest. Johnny respected that Jimmy never tried to be slick, explained a former Tonight Show producer. He'd stumble over words sometimes, pause to find the right expression. He was just being himself, not performing Jimmy Stewart, the way some celebrities perform versions of themselves. What truly cemented Stewart's place as Carson's treasured guest was that legendary 1981 appearance, when the actor read his poem about losing his beloved dog. Those simple, heartfelt verses about his golden retriever caused Carson, famous for his emotional restraint, to visibly tear up on national television. "I'd never seen Johnny react that way to anything," recalled a camera operator present that evening. "He was genuinely moved, and he didn't try hiding it or cracking a joke to break the tension. He just let himself have that human moment with Jimmy and the audience." The poem resonated so deeply with Carson because it reflected the kind of genuine emotion both men struggled to express. Stewart, still carrying invisible wounds from war, had learned to find healing through small moments of tenderness, like his love for his dog. Carson, isolated by fame and his own emotional barriers, recognized something authentic and vulnerable that touched his own hidden pain. After that appearance, Stewart's status was sealed. Carson's staff knew that when Stewart was booked, their normally exacting boss would be in his most generous mood. "Johnny would actually ask us to extend Jimmy's segments if possible," revealed a former producer. "He'd say, 'See if we can give him another few minutes. Move the commercial if you have to.' That kind of scheduling change was practically unheard of." Perhaps most telling was how Carson spoke about Stewart when cameras weren't rolling. According to those who worked closely with him, Carson would sometimes reference Stewart's interviews during production meetings as examples of perfect television, authentic moments that justified the medium's existence. On the night of Carson's final show in 1992, Stewart was among the few celebrities he personally called to thank, a gesture that spoke volumes about the genuine connection between television's most guarded host and Hollywood's most authentic star. While Stewart represented the dignified, emotional side of Carson's ideal guest, his next favorite brought something entirely different, a mastery of timing that matched Carson's own. If Jimmy Stewart touched Carson's heart, Bob Newhart connected with his comedic soul. Bob Newhart, the comic who made it look natural. The stand-up comedian turned sitcom star, shared Carson's dry wit, perfect timing, and ability to find humor in life's everyday moments. Like Carson, Newhart also wrestled with melancholy throughout his life, using comedy as both a coping mechanism and a form of therapy. What made their connection even more poignant was that both men understood the profound isolation that could exist behind a successful comedic persona. "Johnny once called Bob the most effortlessly funny man I know," revealed a writer who worked on The Tonight Show during the 70s and 80s. Coming from Carson, there was no higher praise. Behind Newhart's deadpan delivery was a man who had struggled with severe anxiety and worked as an accountant before finding his comedic voice. His famous stammering delivery wasn't just a comedic device. It was partly rooted in genuine nervousness that he learned to channel into his performance style. This vulnerability beneath the humor created an instant kinship with Carson, who also used comedy to mask his own emotional struggles. What distinguished Newhart from other comedians who appeared on the show was his conversational style. Rather than arriving with prepared bits or recycled material from his act, Newhart engaged in genuine dialogue with Carson, an approach that perfectly complemented the host's own strengths. They had this incredible timing between them, recalled a director who worked on many of Newhart's appearances. Bob would start a story. Johnny would add just the right comment at just the right moment. Bob would build on it. It was like watching two jazz musicians who could anticipate each other's moves perfectly. Don't miss more behind-the-scenes stories from Hollywood's golden era. Carson's appreciation for Newhart was evident in how he broke his own rules when the comedian appeared. Normally strict about keeping segments to their allotted time, Carson would frequently let Newhart run long, sometimes even asking producers to extend his segments at the expense of other guests. If Bob was on a roll, Johnny would just let him go, confirmed a former producer. He'd make the stretch it sign to the control room, which was his signal to delay the commercial break. With most guests, he'd be counting down the seconds until they were done. With Bob, he never wanted it to end. What Carson particularly appreciated about Newhart was his humility. Despite his enormous success, Newhart never arrived with an entourage or special demands. He treated crew members with respect and seemed genuinely grateful for the opportunity to appear on the show. Johnny couldn't stand prima donnas, explained the producer. Bob was the opposite. He'd chat with the pages, thank the makeup people, remember the names of camera operators he'd met years earlier. Johnny noticed those things. Their professional relationship eventually evolved into a genuine friendship, with the two men occasionally golfing together, a clear indication that Carson, famous for keeping his private life separate from his professional world, truly enjoyed Newhart's company. If Johnny invited you to play golf, that meant he actually liked you as a person, not just as a guest, noted a longtime friend of Carson's. Bob was one of the very few celebrities who crossed that line. While Newhart represented the subtle, intellectual comedy Carson admired, his next favorite guest brought something entirely different: spontaneity and unpredictability that kept Carson on his toes. Burt Reynolds, the perfect partner in mischief. When Burt Reynolds appeared on The Tonight Show, viewers knew they weren't just watching an interview. They were witnessing a friendly competition between two men who genuinely enjoyed trying to outdo each other. What made their dynamic even more compelling was that Reynolds was fighting his own demons. He would later face bankruptcy, severe health problems, including a jaw injury that left him in chronic pain, and battles with prescription medication dependency. Yet with Carson, he found a safe space to simply be playful and spontaneous. Burt gets the game. Most guests don't, Carson reportedly told a producer after a particularly memorable appearance by the mustachioed movie star. Reynolds, at the height of his fame in the 70s, understood something crucial about television that many other celebrities missed: that the host-guest relationship worked best as a playful partnership, rather than simply a promotional opportunity. Behind Reynolds' confident exterior was a man who had grown up in poverty and had been abandoned by his father, making him desperately crave approval and connection. His energetic need to entertain stemmed from deep-seated insecurities, but Carson's genuine enjoyment of his antics provided validation that Reynolds rarely found elsewhere in Hollywood. Johnny loved that Burt came to play, not just to plug a movie, explained a former Tonight Show writer. Most stars arrived with talking points from their publicists. Burt arrived with water pistols hidden in his jacket. Their legendary prank wars became a recurring highlight of Reynolds' appearances. In one infamous incident, Reynolds surprised Carson by hitting him in the face with shaving cream during what was supposed to be a serious discussion about an upcoming film. Rather than being annoyed, Carson was delighted by the ambush. According to staff members present, he laughed harder off camera than he did for the audience, genuinely appreciating Reynolds' willingness to shake up the normally predictable talk show format. Johnny loves surprise. Real surprise, not the fake, "I didn't expect that" question. Moments most celebrities rehearse, noted a director who worked on many of Reynolds' appearances. Burt was one of the few guests who could genuinely catch Johnny off guard, and Johnny respected that enormously. What Carson particularly appreciated was Reynolds' ability to take a joke as well as dish one out. When Carson would make quips about Reynolds' box office disappointments or his high-profile romantic relationships, the actor would laugh along genuinely rather than showing the thin-skinned sensitivity common among Hollywood stars. This ability to laugh at himself came from years of surviving childhood poverty and rejection. Reynolds had developed thick skin as a defense mechanism, but it served him well in his friendship with Carson. Johnny had a test for whether he truly liked a celebrity, revealed a longtime producer. Could he tease them without them getting offended? Burt passed that test with flying colors. He not only took the jokes well, he encouraged them. The genuine friendship between the two men was evident in how Carson spoke about Reynolds when the actor wasn't on the show. According to staff members, Carson would often reference Reynolds' prior appearances when preparing for other guests, using him as an example of ideal talk show behavior. Johnny would tell nervous guests, just relax and have fun with it, like Burt Reynolds does, the talent coordinator who worked on the show. That was the highest praise he could offer. While Reynolds represented the playful, unpredictable energy Carson enjoyed, his next favorite guest brought something entirely different, intellectual depth that allowed Carson to show a side of himself rarely seen on television. Orson Welles, the genius who fascinated Carson. When most people think of Johnny Carson, they picture the affable, joke-cracking host who specialized in celebrity interviews and comedy sketches. But those who knew Carson well understood he had a deeply intellectual side, one that emerged most clearly when Orson Welles appeared on The Tonight Show. What made their connection even more meaningful was that both men understood the weight of early trauma and loss. Welles had been orphaned by age 15, losing his mother to illness when he was 9 and his father when he was 15. Like Carson, he had learned to use performance as both an escape from and a way to process deep emotional pain. Johnny was genuinely in awe of Orson, revealed a producer who worked on several of Welles's appearances. Not starstruck, like he sometimes seemed with Jimmy Stewart, but intellectually fascinated. When Orson was scheduled, Johnny would actually read up on subjects he thought might come up: history, literature, theater. He never did that for other guests. Welles carried the burden of being labeled a fallen genius after Citizen Kane, constantly struggling to finance his artistic visions and battling studios for creative control. His brilliance was often overshadowed by his reputation as difficult and uncompromising. Carson, who also fought for creative control of his show, recognized in Welles a kindred spirit who refused to compromise his artistic integrity despite the personal cost. Tag someone who loves classic Hollywood stories like these. What made Welles different from Carson's other favorites was the nature of their conversations. Rather than focusing on Hollywood gossip or promotional chatter, their discussions veered into art, politics, magic, and history, revealing depths to Carson that surprised even longtime viewers. Those interviews showed the Johnny that his friends knew, but the public rarely saw, explained a writer who worked closely with Carson. Well-read, curious about the world, capable of discussing Shakespeare as easily as he could tell a joke about a giraffe. One of the most memorable Welles appearances featured the legendary director performing magic tricks live on air, complex illusions that genuinely stunned the crew and delighted Carson, who had a lifelong interest in magic. Both men had discovered magic as children, a way to create wonder and control their environment when so much of their early lives had felt chaotic and unpredictable. Johnny's face during those tricks was priceless, recalled a camera operator. He was like a kid at a magic show, completely caught up in the wonder of it. After one particularly impressive illusion, Johnny turned to the camera during the commercial break and said, "Did you folks at home see that? That was real magic, not TV magic." What Carson particularly appreciated about Welles was his authenticity. Despite his towering reputation as one of cinema's greatest directors, Welles would discuss his failures as openly as his successes, a candor that Carson found refreshing in an industry built on carefully maintained images. Welles's willingness to discuss his disappointments and unfinished projects resonated with Carson, who also carried private regrets about roads not taken and creative risks he wished he had been brave enough to pursue. Orson would talk about getting fired from movies or having projects canceled without any of the usual Hollywood spin, noted a producer. Johnny respected that honesty enormously. He hated when celebrities tried to pretend everything they touched turned to gold. While their conversations sometimes became so involved that they challenged the light entertainment format of The Tonight Show, Carson never rushed Welles or tried to steer him toward more accessible topics. Instead, he seemed to relish the opportunity to engage on a different level than his usual interviews allowed. Johnny once told me those conversations with Orson were some of the most satisfying moments of his career, revealed a friend of Carson's. He said, "For a few minutes, I get to be myself rather than Johnny Carson, if that makes any sense." While Wells represented the intellectual stimulation Carson craved, his next favorite guest embodied something equally important to the host, the comedy tradition that shaped his own career. Jack Benny, the master who inspired Carson. When Jack Benny appeared on The Tonight Show, viewers witnessed a rare reversal of Carson's usual demeanor. The normally composed, controlling host transformed into an appreciative student in the presence of one of comedy's greatest pioneers. What made their relationship even more poignant was that Benny had overcome his own struggles. He had been a high school dropout who struggled academically before finding his calling in entertainment. His journey from a troubled, directionless youth to comedy royalty inspired Carson, who saw in Benny's story the transformative power of perseverance and dedication to craft. "He was the reason I do what I do," Carson once admitted to a close colleague after a Benny appearance. "Watching him was my masterclass in comedy." Benny's influence on Carson's style was evident to anyone familiar with both men's work. The perfect timing, the subtle reactions, the ability to get laughs with just a look or a pause, all hallmarks of Benny's approach that Carson had studied and adapted for his own performances. Both men had learned that comedy was often about what you didn't say, the pauses, the looks, the perfectly timed silences that could be funnier than any punchline. Johnny's entire comedic philosophy came from Jack, explained a writer who worked with Carson during the 70s. The idea that the host didn't need to dominate with punchlines, that reactions could be funnier than actions, that silence could get bigger laughs than words. That was pure Benny, and Johnny knew it. When Benny visited The Tonight Show, Carson's admiration was palpable. He would laugh more genuinely, listen more attentively, and show deference rarely seen with other guests. According to staff members, Carson would even change the physical setup of the interviews, positioning himself to give Benny the optimal camera angles. Johnny would actually tell the directors, "Make sure you get Jack's reactions, not mine," recalled a former producer. That was unheard of. Carson literally directing attention away from himself to showcase someone else. It showed how much he respected Benny's mastery. What made these appearances particularly special was the generational torch passing they represented. Benny, born in 1894, had pioneered radio comedy when Carson was just a child. By the time Benny appeared on The Tonight Show in the 70s, he was in his late 70s and early 80s. Yet despite his age, Benny had maintained his sharp timing and wit, proving that true comedic genius transcends physical limitations, a lesson that gave Carson hope for his own longevity in the business. Yet his timing remained impeccable, noted a director who worked on several of Benny's appearances. Watching Johnny interact with Jack was like seeing comedy history in real time. Here was the current king of late night, talking with the man who had essentially invented the formula decades earlier. Johnny never forgot that lineage. Carson's respect for Benny extended far beyond their on-air interactions. According to those close to Carson, he kept a framed photo of Benny in his office, the only celebrity picture he displayed in his private workspace. That photo said everything about who Johnny admired most, explained a longtime friend. Not the biggest stars of the moment, or even his own image, but the man who had shown him what television comedy could be at its best. While Benny represented Carson's comedy lineage, his next favorite guest brought something equally valuable, authentic warmth that made every appearance feel like a genuine reunion rather than a professional obligation. Carol Burnett, the guest who brought pure joy. When Carol Burnett appeared on The Tonight Show, something remarkable happened. Johnny Carson, television's most controlled performer, would visibly relax. His shoulders would loosen, his smile would widen, and the invisible barrier he typically maintained between himself and his guests would momentarily disappear. What made their connection even more meaningful was that both performers had emerged from childhoods marked by parents struggling with alcohol dependency and poverty. Burnett had grown up with her grandmother in a tiny Hollywood apartment, while her mother and father battled addiction, learning to cope through imagination and humor. Carson recognized in her the same survival instincts he had developed, the ability to find light in darkness and to transform pain into laughter. "Carol brings sunshine to the stage," Carson reportedly told Ed McMahon after one of Burnett's many appearances. Burnett's radiant personality on screen was all the more remarkable given the tragedies she had endured. She had lost her eldest daughter, Carrie, to cancer in 2002 after watching her struggle with substance dependency as a teenager. She was also in the process of seeking guardianship of her grandson due to her daughter, Erin's ongoing battle with addiction. Yet Burnett never let personal pain dim the warmth she brought to others, a quality that Carson deeply admired. What distinguished Burnett from other regular guests was the natural chemistry she shared with Carson. Unlike the slightly formal rhythm of most Tonight Show interviews, their conversations flowed with the easy familiarity of old friends catching up. With most guests, Johnny was clearly the host, and they were clearly the visitor, explained a director who worked on many of Burnett's appearances. With Carol, it felt like two equals just enjoying each other's company. The audience could sense that difference immediately. Burnett was one of the few performers Carson allowed to go completely off script during appearances. While most celebrities were gently guided through predetermined talking points, Burnett was given free rein to follow conversational tangents, initiate impromptu games, or even turn the tables and begin interviewing Carson himself. Johnny trusted Carol completely, noted a former producer. He knew she understood television timing as well as he did, that she would never embarrass him or the show, and most importantly, that whatever spontaneous direction she took would be entertaining. That level of trust was incredibly rare. What Carson particularly appreciated about Burnett was her complete lack of pretension. Despite her enormous success with The Carol Burnett Show, she arrived at The Tonight Show with minimal entourage, no special demands, and genuine appreciation for the crew members who made the production possible. This humility stemmed from her hard-scrabble childhood. She never forgot what it felt like to have nothing, and treated everyone with the kindness she had wished for during her own difficult early years. Carol would remember the names of camera operators and makeup artists she'd met years earlier, recalled a longtime staff member. She'd ask about their families and actually listen to the answers. Johnny noticed those things and valued them enormously. The genuine affection between them was evident in how Carson broke his own rules when Burnett appeared. Typically strict about keeping segments to their allocated time, he would frequently extend her appearances, sometimes even bumping other guests to give her more airtime. When the producer would signal that it was time to wrap up, Johnny would sometimes just wave them off if Carol was in the middle of a good story, explained a former director. That almost never happened with other guests, no matter how famous they were. Perhaps the most telling evidence of Carson's fondness for Burnett was how frequently he mentioned her when she wasn't on the show. According to staff members, Carson would often reference Burnett's previous appearances when preparing for other guests, using her as the gold standard for talk show behavior. While Burnett brought warmth and spontaneity that Carson treasured, his next favorite guest offered something equally valuable: authentic masculinity without the Hollywood pretense. James Garner? What a movie star should be. When James Garner settled into the Tonight Show couch, viewers witnessed a rare type of celebrity interview, one that felt like eavesdropping on two regular guys talking rather than a promotional appearance by a movie star. What made Garner's authenticity even more remarkable was the pain he carried beneath his easygoing exterior. He wrestled with clinical melancholy throughout his life, stemming partly from a harsh childhood in Oklahoma, where he faced poverty and an abusive stepmother. His military service in the Korean War, where he was wounded twice and earned 2 Purple Hearts, had left invisible scars that he rarely discussed publicly. Yet rather than making him bitter, these experiences had given him genuine humility and perspective. "He's what a movie star should be, and most aren't," Johnny quipped to a producer after one of Garner's many appearances. What Carson appreciated most about Garner was his complete authenticity. Unlike many Hollywood leading men, who seemed to be performing even when the cameras weren't rolling, Garner brought a natural, unpretentious quality to his Tonight Show visits that Carson found refreshing. Garner's down-to-earth demeanor came from never forgetting his roots. He had left home at 16 to work various jobs and support himself, developing a strong work ethic and genuine appreciation for honest work that stayed with him throughout his Hollywood success. Johnny could spot a phony from a mile away, explained a talent coordinator who worked on the show for many years. James was the opposite of phony. What you saw was exactly what you got, whether cameras were rolling or not. Behind Garner's steady presence was a man who struggled with multiple health issues, heart problems requiring quintuple bypass surgery, numerous knee injuries from performing his own stunts, and chronic pain from injuries sustained during filming. Yet he never complained or sought sympathy, instead using humor to deflect attention from his physical struggles. Carson, who also preferred to keep his own problems private, respected this stoic approach to adversity. Garner's stories about Hollywood had a distinctively grounded quality. When he talked about making The Great Escape or his experiences on Maverick, he focused on the human moments rather than self-aggrandizing tales, the practical jokes between takes, the friendships formed with crew members, the mistakes and mishaps that rarely made it into official Hollywood narratives. James talked about being a movie star, the way most people talk about their office jobs, noted a writer who worked on several of Garner's appearances. He'd describe Steve McQueen throwing a tantrum the same way someone might talk about a difficult co-worker, with a mix of affection and exasperation, but no reverence whatsoever. This down-to-earth quality extended to how Garner handled himself off-camera as well. According to numerous staff accounts, he arrived with minimal entourage, made a point of thanking crew members, and treated everyone from the pages to the producers with the same respectful attention. Johnny valued that kind of behavior more than most people realized, revealed a longtime producer. He paid close attention to how guests treated the staff when they thought no one important was watching. James passed that test with flying colors every time. What made Garner particularly special among Carson's favorites was how he bridged different worlds. He could tell stories about Hollywood legends that fascinated Carson's older viewers while maintaining an approachable modern sensibility that appealed to younger audience members. James had worked with everyone from Marlon Brando to Julie Andrews, but he never name-dropped or acted impressed with himself, the producer continued. Johnny loved you that he could reference old Hollywood without sounding like he was stuck in the past. The genuine friendship between the two men was evident in their on-air comfort with each other. Carson, typically careful to maintain some professional distance with guests, would occasionally reference private conversations or shared experiences with Garner, a rare breach of the wall he usually maintained between his public and private lives. While Garner represented unpretentious authenticity that Carson valued, his next favorite guest brought something equally precious, living history that connected Carson to comedy's golden age. George Burns, the legend who kept getting better. When George Burns appeared on The Tonight Show, particularly in his later years, viewers witnessed something extraordinary. Johnny Carson, television's unquestioned king, treating his guest with the deference normally reserved for visiting royalty. What made Burns's resilience even more remarkable was his journey from unimaginable poverty to comedy legend. Born Nathan Birnbaum, he was one of 12 children in a poor Jewish immigrant family. When his father passed away, 7-year-old Nathan left school to help support his family, working any job he could find, and even stealing coal to heat their home. His childhood was marked by such hardship that he once said his father wasn't a romantic figure, it was just that there was nowhere else to sleep in their overcrowded tenement. At 80, 90, and eventually over 100 years old, Burns represented something Carson deeply respected: longevity in a notoriously fickle business and the living connection to vaudeville, the entertainment tradition that had shaped Carson's own comedic sensibilities. Johnny would actually get nervous before George's appearances, revealed a producer who worked on several of Burns's visits to the show. Not because he was worried about the interview going badly, but because he had such enormous respect for George's place in comedy history. It was like watching a concert pianist prepare to play for Mozart. Burns had survived not just poverty, but also the loss of his beloved wife and comedy partner Gracie Allen in 1964. Rather than retiring in grief, he reinvented himself as a solo performer, proving that true talent could transcend even the deepest personal loss. This resilience in the face of heartbreak resonated deeply with Carson, who understood the challenge of maintaining a public persona while dealing with private pain. What made Burns unique among Carson's favorites was how he improved with age. While many older performers relied on recycling past glories, Burns continued to evolve his act well into his 90s, bringing fresh material and sharp observations to each appearance. Johnny used to say that George was the only person in Hollywood who got funnier as he got older, recalled a writer who worked on The Tonight Show during the 80s. He'd say most of us peak and then hang on. George just keeps climbing. Carson's respect was evident in how he conducted these interviews, typically the master of his domain, who gently guided conversations where he wanted them to go. With Burns, Carson would often simply ask a question and then lean back, giving the comedy legend complete control of the segment. Johnny would sometimes go 2 or 3 minutes without saying anything when George was on a roll, noted a director who worked on many of Burns's appearances. For Carson, who typically jumped in every 30 seconds with most guests, that was extraordinary. He knew great comedy when he saw it, and he wasn't going to interrupt it. Burns himself recognized the special treatment he received. In his autobiography, he wrote, "If Johnny Carson likes you, you're bulletproof in this business. And for some reason I can't explain, Johnny always liked me." The reason, according to those who knew Carson well, was simple. Burns embodied the professionalism, timing, and dedication to craft that Carson valued above all else. Burns never complained about his hardships or used them as excuses. He simply worked harder than anyone else and found ways to turn even tragedy into comedy. This work ethic, born from childhood necessity, created a foundation of professionalism that Carson deeply admired. George never missed a beat, never flubbed a punchline, never forgot where he was going with a story, explained a longtime producer. Johnny, who prided himself on those same qualities, saw Burns as the ultimate example of what a comedian should be, someone who made incredibly difficult work look effortless. Perhaps most telling was how Carson treated Burns during commercial breaks. According to crew members, Carson, who typically used these moments to confer with producers or prepare for the next segment, would remain fully engaged with Burns when the cameras weren't rolling, often asking him questions about performers from the 20s and 30s who had influenced Carson's own development. Johnny was getting a private masterclass in comedy history during those breaks, noted a camera operator who witnessed many of these interactions, and he treasured every minute of it. While Burns connected Carson to comedy's roots, his final favorite guest represented something equally significant: female comedy pioneering that paralleled Carson's own television innovations. Lucille Ball, television royalty. When Lucille Ball appeared on The Tonight Show, two television pioneers shared the stage, each having transformed the medium in their own way. While Carson had reinvented late-night television, Ball had revolutionized the sitcom format a generation earlier. What made their mutual respect even more meaningful was the remarkable journey Ball had taken to reach that pinnacle. She had endured a childhood marked by poverty and tragedy, losing her father to illness, and when she was just 3, then experiencing a traumatic family accident involving a weapon that cost them everything they owned. She had been told to give up on acting by drama teachers, faced countless rejections, and survived 2 miscarriages during her troubled marriage to Desi Arnaz, whose infidelity and alcohol dependency left her emotionally shattered. "She's royalty," Carson told his audience during Ball's appearance on his 10th anniversary special, a rare moment when he openly acknowledged his admiration for a guest. What made Ball's appearances special wasn't just her comedic talents, though those remained sharp throughout her career, but the mutual respect evident between two performers who understood the challenges of television better than perhaps anyone else in the industry. Both had learned to use comedy as both an escape from personal pain and a way to connect with audiences who were dealing with their own struggles. They understood that behind every laugh was often a story of resilience and survival. They both knew what it meant to carry a show week after week, year after year, explained a producer who worked with both stars at different points in his career. They'd both felt the pressure of millions of people tuning in, expecting to be entertained. That created a bond that was obvious whenever they were together. Carson, normally careful to maintain his position as the center of The Tonight Show, would visibly defer to Ball during her appearances, giving her the best camera angles, laughing genuinely at her jokes, and showing a warmth that went beyond his usual professional courtesy. Carson recognized in Ball a kindred spirit who had not only survived industry prejudice and personal betrayal, but had emerged stronger, eventually becoming the first woman to head a major television studio. Her business acumen and creative control inspired Carson, who was fighting his own battles for artistic independence. Johnny treated Lucy like the queen of television, which in many ways she was, recalled a director who worked on several of Ball's appearances. He would actually tell the camera operators before the show, "Make sure you get her reactions, not just mine." That was practically unheard of. One of the most touching moments between them came during a 1973 appearance when Carson surprised Ball with footage from her earliest screen test, material she hadn't seen in decades. According to those present, Ball was visibly moved, briefly tearing up before recovering with a characteristic quip. The moment was particularly poignant because it reminded Ball of how far she had traveled from those early days of rejection and struggle, when casting directors saw her as just another pretty face rather than the comedic genius she would become. That moment revealed so much about their relationship, noted a former Tonight Show writer. Johnny knew exactly what would touch her without being exploitative, and Lucy trusted him enough to show genuine emotion rather than just her polished public persona. What Carson particularly appreciated about Ball was her pioneering role as a businesswoman in an industry dominated by men. As the first female head of a major television studio, Ball had broken barriers that Carson, who formed his own production company, deeply respected. Ball's business success was born from necessity. After her devastating divorce from Arnaz left her financially vulnerable, she was determined never to be dependent on anyone else again. She fought for ownership of her shows and creative control with a fierceness that came from having lost everything once before. Johnny once told me that Lucy was the smartest person in television. Not just the funniest woman, but the smartest person, period, revealed a friend who knew both stars. He admired how she had navigated Hollywood as both a performer and an executive when women weren't supposed to be either. The genuine affection between them was evident in how Carson broke his own rules when Ball appeared. Typically strict about keeping segments to their allocated time, He would frequently extend her appearances, sometimes even bumping other guests to give her more airtime. When the producer would signal that it was time to wrap up, Johnny would sometimes just wave them off if Lucy was in the middle of a good story, explained a former director. That almost never happened with other guests, no matter how famous they were. Perhaps most telling was how Carson spoke about Ball when she wasn't on the show. According to staff members, Carson would often reference her when discussing the challenges of television with other guests, citing her work ethic and resilience as models for the industry. Ball's ability to reinvent herself after personal and professional setbacks, from her divorce to the failure of later projects, showed Carson that true professionals could survive any crisis and emerge stronger. Lucy represented everything Johnny valued in a performer, explained a longtime producer. Talent without pretension, success without arrogance, and most importantly, the understanding that television was both an art form and a business, and you had to master both sides to truly succeed. These 9 guests didn't just appear on Johnny Carson's show, they became part of his television family. Each brought something irreplaceable: Stewart's dignity, Newhart's wit, Reynolds's playfulness, Wells's brilliance, Benny's mastery, Burnett's joy, Garner's authenticity, Burns's wisdom, and Ball's pioneering spirit. Together, they created moments of pure television magic that reminded us why The Tonight Show became America's living room for 30 incredible years. If you enjoyed revisiting these magical moments, please like, subscribe, and share this video to help keep the memories alive.